fellow gardeners. My name is Melanie Davis with the Master Gardeners of Davidson County, and I'm here with Becky Fox Matthews talking all things daffodils. Hey there, Becky. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Melanie.
Excellent. So let's start with some of the basics about daffodils.
Well, there are a lot of different ways to classify daffodils, but one of the easiest for beginners is based on when it was registered or when it was first known about. So there are historic daffodils that are very old, and they're known about before 1940. And then there are what we call classic daffodils, and they were registered or known about between 1940 and 1969. And then the ones newer than that are considered modern daffodils. Okay, so historic daffodils are really enchanting, and they have this grace and just this beauty that a lot of the newer cultivars don't have. But the newer cultivars tend to have really smooth petals, thick substance. That's saying that the petal holds up really well. It's not slight or thin. And they also are symmetrical. They have good overlap of the petals. And the historics, they don't have those newer characteristics, but they're just beautiful flowers still. And we want to encourage people to keep growing them in their gardens. So, for example, in the shows, we have one section where you can enter historics. They're judged against other historics. And then we have the classics. They're judged against other classics, and the new ones are judged against the other modern daffodils. So that gives them all a chance to be seen. And you can also look through the show, or for example, here in the garden, you could look through and see the differences between the historics and the more modern daffodils. You can see what the hybridizers have been trying to go for, some of their goals and some of their maybe surprise results that have come out of their crosses. And so it's just really been fun to be able to see that progression through the ages.
So Becky, can you tell us a little bit about what makes the species of daffodils so different?
Yes, the species are the original wild daffodils. So before anybody was hybridizing and creating our own versions of daffodils, they were discovered in Europe, along the Pyrenees Mountains, and all kinds of elevation areas. So some of them like to grow high in the mountains, some way low down in the valleys. But they were all a line of countries, Italy, France, even England, and even down all the way to Morocco. And so they grow in a line of countries. That's where they all originated, all daffodils. So there are a lot of the original species that settlers brought over when they came to the southern United States. And the women would sew the bulbs into the hems of their skirts as they came over on the long ship journey, because they couldn't bring plants or flowers, so they would bring the bulbs. So you find them planted along a lot of old home sites. A lot of the daffodils that people find, and they say, what kind of daffodil is this? It may be a historic, a really old daffodil, or it may be actually one of the original species. Wow. So one of the species I have in the yard that I really like, and it's in bloom now, its nickname is Campanile, and it is unique because when you look down at the blooms, you can have more blooms per one stem. You can have several blooms per stem. And if you look at the biggest bloom, the first one to open, it may have 6 petals, which is what daffodils are supposed to have, 6 or multiples of 6 petals. And then that second bloom is probably going to have 5 petals, and the third one might have 4. So it's just a characteristic of that species. But it's still, it's just an enchanting little flower. And a lot of those are fragrant, too.
Becky, what are some other ways that daffodils are categorized?
Well, there are 13 divisions of daffodils, and everyone has different characteristics. And besides the division, there also is something called a color code, which if you look at a daffodil in a catalog, or hopefully in a garden that has really good display on their daffodils, you'll see the division and the color code, and you can actually tell something about what the daffodil looks like just by looking at that little bit of information before you even see the flower or a picture of the flower.
Interesting.
So the color code, daffodils are, some people think they're all yellow, but that's not true. You've seen orange ones, orange cups, and even some petals with an orange flush to them. We have white ones. We have some with green eyes down in the middle of the cup. We're getting more greenish daffodils. So you've got white, yellow, green, orange, and there's also red and pink daffodils. So far, those are the colors so far that you can use for color codes in daffodils. And the hybridizer, the person who registered and invented that daffodil, hybridized it and grew it to bloom, they get to name the flower and they get to give it the color code. So A daffodil that has a pink cup may not open with a pink cup. It may open with a yellow cup and then gradually change to pink. So sometimes you think, oh, that's probably not the right one, but if you give it a little time, it'll color up. And so even if a flower doesn't look like it didn't have its pink cup yet, and you put it in the show, you would put it in the show with the color code that the hybridizer had given it.
Well, Becky, you mentioned that there are 13 different divisions of daffodils. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, without going into all 13 divisions in order, which I do sometimes when I do daffodil talks, and it's really fun to do that. But the first 4 divisions are really based on the cup of the daffodil. So you've got the cup in the center, and then you've got the petals or the perianth around that. So the cups can be longer than the petals, which is the first division. The cups can be not quite as long as the petals. They can have small cups, and then there are daffodils where the cups or the petals are all doubled. Those are the ones that look kind of like carnations or roses, you know. And then the rest of the daffodils, well, the ones from divisions 5 through 10, all of those are in those divisions because they have some strong characteristics of the original species. We talked about those original species of daffodil. So the original species, Narcissus jonquilla, has very tiny little flowers and is very, very fragrant. So there are hybrid jonquillas that are in the division for jonquillas, which is division 7. And then the last 2, the last 3, no, anyway, division 11 are split cup daffodils, and there's a joke that a Dutch hybridizer planted a pair of scissors with a bulb, and what came up was a split cup daffodil. But it was just a mutation that he saw as something promising to work with, and it's been hybridized with until they're beautiful split cups of all colors now. And the cup is actually split into 3 parts and lays back against the petals, and sometimes the cups are plain, sometimes they're frilly. There's a wide variety of split cup daffodils. And then division 12 are all the oddballs that will not fit anywhere else. There's got to be a spot for the oddballs. And division 13s are those original species that we talked about.
So a little something for everybody if you're looking for daffodils.
Yeah, and a lot of people only know a couple of divisions of daffodils, and when they see all the different ones in the garden, the first time I saw a bulbocodium, which is division 10, I thought, you're kidding me, that can't be a daffodil. So some of them just look very different, but it's nice to know the full range of what is a daffodil.
Do you have any tips for people about how they can get their blooms to last a little bit longer, whether in the garden or as cut flowers?
Well, there's not a lot you can do in the garden, other than if you're really a crazy daffodil show person. I've seen in New Zealand they build little things that actually look like a doghouse, and they put it on stilts over the cluster of daffodils to keep them from getting too much sun so that they last longer in the garden. But I don't think we would normally do that.
Right.
So in the garden, they need at least 6 hours of sun. If they're in a little shade, they might last a little bit longer. But basically, after you cut the flower, when you pick it, you usually don't cut it. People say cut, but you usually follow the stem all the way down and just snap it off as far down as you can get it. And then you put it in warm water, about 80 degrees, and you let it sit in that warm water for a few hours in a kind of a cool, shady location. And then you recut the stem at an angle so it can soak up a lot of fresh, cool water, and put it in fresh, cool water. And then it's conditioned, so then it would last longer.
Gotcha. And that also prevents it from poisoning or negatively affecting other flowers in the same vase.
Yes, because a lot of florists, people do arranging a lot. They know that you put other flowers in the vase with the daffodils, and the other flowers are not going to last as long.
Yeah.
So you either have them conditioned first so they're not going to exude that chemical that deteriorates other flowers, or you put them in a separate little test tube or a separate little tube down in your vase.
Becky, can you give us a few tips on how to plant daffodils to the best way to get them to bloom, the best location?
It's very easy. Most everybody will tell you pointy end up. But basically, if you look at a bulb, you look at the depth of the bulb, how big the bulb is, and you plant it about 3 times that depth. So the bottom of the bulb, if it's a 2-inch diameter bulb, you'd plant the base of it about 6 inches down. And in Tennessee, if you can't get that deep because of our clay soil or whatever, just get it as deep as you can, and it'll adjust. It'll be fine. For little tiny miniature daffodils, I love planting miniature daffodils because you only have to dig a little hole because they're little tiny bulbs.
Much easier in the soil.
Very easy. And the other things is they need at least 6 hours of sunshine. And under deciduous trees is fine because they're getting the sunshine right now before the leaves are on the trees.
Right.
They need to be in a place with great drainage, so they don't like to sit with wet feet during the summer. And we get a lot of big rains all year round here during the summer too. But as long as it's a place that drains, you don't want anywhere that is pooling water.
Gotcha.
And that's one reason that sometimes people lose daffodils is because they planted in somewhere that's getting irrigated all summer long.
Yeah.
So those are just not good places. Put them somewhere you can neglect them and they'll do fine.
Well, Becky, thank you so much for having us here. We really appreciate you answering all these questions and sharing your knowledge with our audience.
I appreciate you coming today. It's been a lot of fun.
Beautiful day, too.
Yes.
Thank you.